My name is Haley Thompson, and at 27, I'm living my dream as a senior automotive engineer with my own consulting firm. But 5 years ago, my parents betrayed me by selling my most prized possession, my grandfather's 1967 Mustang Fastback, to fund my spoiled sister's whims. The look on their faces when I pulled into their driveway with that same car, fully restored? Priceless. Before I get into this crazy story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had something precious taken from you. Trust me, you'll want to see how I turn this heartbreak into the best revenge success story. My love affair with cars began when I was just 7 years old. My grandfather, Robert Thompson, was a mechanical genius who spent his weekends in his garage, always tinkering with some vintage beauty. While other little girls were playing with dolls, I was handing tools to Grandpa Rob and soaking up every word as he explained how engines worked, what made a carburetor tick, and why certain cars were engineering marvels. "Haley girl," he'd say, wiping grease from his weathered hands, "cars aren't just machines. They're stories on wheels. Every ding, every repair, every mile, they all tell you something about the journey." His garage was my classroom, and under that metal roof, I learned more than just mechanics. I learned patience, problem-solving, and the satisfaction of bringing something back to life with your own two hands. My parents never really understood this connection. They'd smile politely when I'd come home covered in grease, but the pride in their eyes was always reserved for my younger sister, Megan. Megan was everything I wasn't: conventionally pretty, socially adept, and interested in things my parents found easier to understand. While I was calculating gear ratios, she was calculating social hierarchies. Don't get me wrong, I loved my sister, but even as kids, we inhabited different universes. On my 13th birthday, everything changed. Grandpa Rob took me to the back of his garage and pulled a tarp off a rusted, dented frame that barely resembled a car. "Know what this is?" he asked, eyes twinkling. Even in that condition, I recognized the distinctive lines. 1967 Mustang Fastback, I breathed, running my hand along the faded paint. "Smart girl. She needs a lot of love, but she's got good bones." He handed me the key, just a simple piece of metal, but it felt like gold in my palm. "When you turn 16, she's yours. But only if we restore her together. Deal?" I couldn't believe it. The Mustang was legendary, the kind of car that made people stop and stare, the kind that rumbled with American muscle car history. And Grandpa was offering it to me. Not to my dad. Not to any of my cousins. To me. For the next 2 years, every weekend was dedicated to that car. We sourced original parts from junkyards and specialty shops. Grandpa taught me to weld, to sand, to prime. We rebuilt the engine piece by piece. My hands grew calloused, my knowledge expanded, and that car slowly transformed from a rusted shell into something magnificent. My parents would occasionally peek into the garage, nod politely, then return to whatever activity Megan was involved in, usually something that required expensive clothing, lessons, or travel. I noticed, but I didn't care. I had Grandpa Rob and the Mustang. Then, 3 months before my 16th birthday, Grandpa had a massive stroke. One minute he was showing me how to install the Mustang's new carburetor, the next he was being rushed to the hospital. He never regained consciousness. 2 weeks later, we buried the man who had shown me what passion truly meant. The day after the funeral, my father handed me an envelope. "He wanted you to have this," Dad said awkwardly. Inside was a handwritten note and the title to the Mustang, legally transferred to my name. The note read simply, "Haley girl, finish what we started. Every mile you drive in her is a mile I'm riding shotgun with you. Love, Grandpa." I sobbed for hours, clutching that piece of paper. The Mustang wasn't just a car anymore. It was my last connection to the person who had truly seen me, who had valued what made me different. The restoration wasn't complete, but I was determined to finish it before college. I took after-school jobs to pay for parts. I watched tutorial videos when I got stuck. I even recruited a couple of guys from the high school auto shop class to help with the heavy lifting. By the summer before my senior year, the Mustang was about 80% complete. The engine ran, though it needed fine-tuning. The body was painted a gorgeous vintage blue. The interior still needed work, but I could see the finish line. That car represented everything to me: my relationship with my grandfather, my own determination and skill, and my future. I planned to drive it to college, where I would study automotive engineering. In my mind, the Mustang was both my past and my future. What I didn't know was that my sister had plans of her own, plans that would set us on a collision course, with the Mustang caught in the middle. The letter from Stanford University's School of Engineering arrived on a sweltering July afternoon. I'd been accepted with a partial scholarship, enough to make attendance possible, but not enough to cover everything. Still, I was ecstatic. This was my dream school, the first step toward a career designing the cars of the future. My parents congratulated me with tight smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Later that night, I overheard them discussing finances in hushed tones. "We just don't have enough for both girls," my mother whispered. The Stanford tuition, even with Haley's scholarship, plus Megan's cheerleading camp and her junior year expenses. "We'll figure it out," my father assured her. "We always do." I should have recognized the warning signs, but I was too caught up in my excitement about Stanford and too focused on finishing the Mustang's restoration before leaving for college. I picked up extra shifts at the local auto parts store, saving every penny for the vintage leather upholstery I'd found for the seats. Meanwhile, Megan had been selected for an elite cheerleading camp in Texas, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, according to my parents. The camp cost nearly $5,000, not including the new uniforms, travel expenses, and necessary shopping trips for appropriate clothing. On top of that, Megan had started campaigning for a brand new Jeep Wrangler for her 16th birthday, which was coming up in the fall. "Everyone in my squad has their own car," she complained over dinner one night. "I can't keep having Mom drive me to practices. It's humiliating." I rolled my eyes but kept quiet. I was used to Megan's dramatics and my parents' indulgence. The day everything changed started normally enough. I worked a morning shift at the auto parts store, then headed to my friend Tyler's house to use his garage lift for some underbody work on the Mustang. I'd been keeping the car there for the past few weeks since Tyler had better tools. When I got home around 7 p.m., my parents and Megan were sitting in the living room, an unusual tableau of calm that immediately set off alarm bells in my head. "What's going on?" I asked, dropping my backpack by the door. My father cleared his throat. "Haley, we need to talk about college expenses." "I know it's tight," I said quickly. "I'm applying for more scholarships, and I can work part-time while I'm at school." "That won't be necessary," my mother cut in with a strange smile. "We've found a solution." "We sold the Mustang," my father announced flatly. The words didn't make sense at first. "Sold the Mustang? My Mustang? The one in Tyler's garage? What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice rising. "You can't sell the Mustang. It's mine. Grandpa left it to me. I have the title." "The title that's kept in our safe," my father corrected. "You're a minor, Haley. Legally, we have custody of your property until you're 18. The room seemed to tilt sideways. "You went to Tyler's and took my car?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "We explained the situation to Tyler's parents," my mother said defensively. "They understood completely." "Who did you sell it to? How much did you get?" I was shouting now, tears streaming down my face. "A collector from Oklahoma. He gave us $15,000 cash, which was very generous considering the car isn't even finished." I nearly choked. $15,000? That car is worth 3 times that much when restored. The engine alone is worth whatever someone will pay for it, my father interrupted firmly. "This way, we can cover the remainder of your Stanford tuition, Megan's camp, and put a down payment on a sensible used car for her." I turned to look at my sister, who had remained suspiciously quiet throughout this exchange. She had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but I caught the satisfied gleam in her eye. "You knew about this," I said quietly. "You knew they were selling my car so you could go to cheer camp and get your own car." "It's not like you were even driving it," Megan defended. "It was just sitting in Tyler's garage collecting dust. Besides, you're going to college across the country. What were you going to do, drive it to California?" "Yes!" I screamed. That was exactly my plan. To finish restoring MY car, the car MY grandfather left to me, and drive it to college. The car that I've poured 3 years of work into. Haley, that's enough, my father said sternly. What's done is done. The car is gone. The buyer picked it up this morning. This morning, while I was working my shift, saving money for parts, my parents had snuck behind my back and sold my most precious possession. How could you do this? I whispered, my voice breaking. That was all I had left of Grandpa. Don't be so dramatic, my mother sighed. It was just a car, and not even a functional one at that. This way, everyone gets what they need. You get to go to Stanford without crushing student loans, and Megan gets what she wants, I finished bitterly. Like always. I turned and walked out of the house, ignoring their calls to come back. I spent that night at Tyler's, crying until I had no tears left. The empty space in his garage where the Mustang had been parked was a physical representation of the hole in my heart. The next morning, I made 3 decisions that would change the course of my life. First, I would go to Stanford as planned, but I would not accept a single penny from my parents. I would take out loans, find scholarships, work multiple jobs if necessary. Second, I would become so successful in my field that one day I could buy back the Mustang, or one just like it, without their help. And third, I would never forgive them for what they had done. I returned home long enough to pack my essential belongings. As I was loading boxes into Tyler's truck, my father approached with a check. Your portion of the car money, he explained, holding it out to me. $5,000 toward your tuition. I looked at the check, then back at my father's face. Without a word, I tore the check into tiny pieces and let them flutter to the driveway. Haley, he called after me as I climbed into Tyler's truck. Don't be foolish. You need this money. No, I said with a calmness I didn't feel. What I needed was for my parents to respect what was mine. What I needed was the one thing Grandpa left me. What I needed was for you to see me, just once, the way you see Megan. I closed the door and nodded to Tyler to drive. In the rearview mirror, I watched my father standing in the driveway, surrounded by the confetti of his torn check, growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared completely. Stanford University's campus sprawled before me like something from a dream. Spanish colonial buildings with terracotta roofs, palm trees swaying in the California breeze, and the promise of a fresh start. I arrived with 6 suitcases, 3 maxed-out credit cards, and a determination that burned hotter than the engine I'd lovingly rebuilt for the Mustang. The first week of classes, I met with the financial aid office and laid out my situation. I needed to be completely self-sufficient. The counselor looked skeptical when I explained that I wouldn't be accepting any parental contributions, but she helped me find additional scholarships and work-study opportunities. It wouldn't be enough, but it was a start. Within a month, I had 3 jobs: morning shifts at a campus coffee shop, weekend work at a local garage, and tutoring engineering students in the evenings. I slept 4 hours a night and subsisted on ramen and coffee. But with every paycheck, every exhausted night spent studying, I felt a fierce pride. This was my life now, built with my own hands, just like I'd been building that car. During my first semester's automotive design seminar, I met Professor Jessica Reed, a former lead engineer at Tesla who had helped design their revolutionary battery systems. After class one day, she stopped me as I was packing up my books. Thompson, right? She asked, peering at me over stylish glasses. Your analysis of the combustion efficiency problem was impressive. Thank you, Professor, I said, trying not to show how much the compliment meant to me. Do you have industry experience? Your understanding of practical applications is unusual for a freshman. I hesitated, then told her about the Mustang, how my grandfather had taught me to rebuild engines, how I'd spent 3 years restoring the car, and how it had been sold without my consent. Professor Reed listened without interruption, then nodded. Their loss, she said simply. My research team has an opening for an undergraduate assistant. The pay is decent, and the experience will be valuable. Interested? That was the beginning of my real education. Under Professor Reed's mentorship, I thrived. My project work focused on improving efficiency in hybrid engine systems, a perfect blend of classic combustion mechanics and cutting-edge technology. By my junior year, We had developed a modification that improved fuel efficiency by 22% without sacrificing performance. Meanwhile, contact with my family dwindled to near nothing. I went home that first Thanksgiving only to find that Megan was driving a nearly new Jeep Wrangler, not the sensible used car my parents had initially described. She spent the entire weekend talking about her popularity at school, while my parents asked superficial questions about Stanford that never touched on my actual accomplishments. I didn't go home for Christmas, or spring break, or the following summer. My mother called occasionally, her voice always tinged with a forced cheerfulness that grated on my nerves. "We miss you, honey," she'd say. "Dad and I were thinking maybe we could fly out to visit you." "I'm busy," I'd reply. Midterms. Research. Work. Always an excuse, always true enough to be believable. My father's calls were less frequent and more awkward. "Your mother worries about you," he'd say, as if his own concern was too painful to acknowledge directly. I never asked about the Mustang. I couldn't bear to know where it was or what had happened to it. In my mind, it existed in a suspended state, neither mine nor truly gone. By senior year, the prototype hybrid system Professor Reed and I had developed caught the attention of several major automotive companies. Our patent application was pending, and job offers started rolling in. I accepted a position with Rivian, the electric adventure vehicle company, at their research facility in Michigan. The starting salary made my student loan debt seem manageable, and the work aligned perfectly with my interests. At graduation, I scanned the crowd out of habit, not expecting to see my family. I'd sent them an announcement but told them not to come. I was too busy with the ceremony and moving preparations to entertain visitors, I'd explained in the email. So I was surprised to spot my parents in the audience, dressed uncomfortably in their Sunday best, my father's hand raised in a tentative wave when our eyes met. Megan wasn't with them. After the ceremony, we engaged in the most painful small talk I'd ever experienced. They complimented my honors courts and asked about my new job. I answered politely but briefly. When my father reached to hug me goodbye, I allowed it but didn't return the embrace. "We're proud of you, Haley," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know you don't believe that, but we are." "Thanks for coming," I replied, stepping back. "I have to go. My friends are waiting to help me pack up my apartment." That was the last time I saw them in person for nearly 3 years. At Rivian, I threw myself into my work with the same intensity I'd once devoted to the Mustang. My hybrid engine technology was incorporated into their new line of vehicles, earning me a promotion and a significant bonus when the patent was finally approved. By 25, I was leading my own research team. By 26, I had enough capital and industry connections to launch Thompson Automotive Consulting. The distance, both geographical and emotional, between my family and me had solidified into something that felt permanent. Occasional phone calls on birthdays and holidays maintained the thinnest veneer of connection. From these conversations, I gleaned snippets of information. My father was still at the same company, but worried about downsizing. My mother had developed some health issues she vaguely described as nothing serious. Megan had dropped out of college to pursue influencer status, with limited success. I listened and made appropriate noises of concern, but their problems felt like stories from a book I'd read long ago, familiar, but not quite real. With my growing financial success came the ability to indulge my passion again. I purchased a spacious garage in a Detroit suburb and began collecting classic cars in need of restoration. A '69 Camaro, a '73 Corvette Stingray, a '65 Shelby Cobra replica. Each one filled a small part of the void left by the Mustang, but none quite captured its meaning. Then one night, scrolling through an online forum for classic car enthusiasts, I saw a post that stopped my heart. 1967 Mustang Fastback, blue, partially restored, engine rebuilt but needs work. Previous owner claims it was restored by his granddaughter before he bought it. Attached was a single photo, grainy and dark, but unmistakable. The distinctive paint color I'd selected. The chrome trim pieces we'd spent months tracking down. The custom wheels my grandfather had insisted were the only ones worthy of the car. My hands shaking, I messaged the poster. "Where's this car now? Who owns it?" The response came hours later, been through a few owners. Last I heard, it was sold to a junkyard in Illinois after an accident damaged the front end. Shame was a beauty in progress. I hired a private investigator the next day. It cost me $10,000 and took 3 months, but they found it, my Mustang, sitting in a junkyard outside Chicago. Its once beautiful blue paint faded and rusted, the front crumpled from an impact with what appeared to be a tree. The engine had been stripped for parts. The junkyard owner wanted $3,000 for it, highway robbery for what was essentially a shell, but a bargain for what it meant to me. I paid without negotiation and had it transported to my garage in Michigan. When the flatbed truck delivered what remained of my grandfather's legacy, I stood in silence for a long time, just looking at it. Then I placed my hand on the damaged hood, feeling the cold metal beneath my palm. "I found you," I whispered. "And this time, no one's taking you away from me." I documented every step of the restoration process on social media. Reunited, a '67 Mustang's journey home, gained a surprising following: other car enthusiasts, restoration specialists, and people who simply appreciated the story of reclaiming something lost. I didn't share all the details of how the car had been taken from me, but I hinted at enough that followers understood this was more than just another project. What I didn't reveal on those posts was my ultimate plan for the Mustang once it was restored, a plan that would bring my long separation from my family to a dramatic end. 2 years into my career at Rivian, the company's leadership recognized the potential of the hybrid engine system I'd helped develop. They assigned me to lead a special project team focused on integrating this technology into their next generation of vehicles. My team consisted of 12 engineers, each specializing in different aspects of automotive design, from aerodynamics to materials science, but I was the youngest department head by nearly a decade. "Thompson," my director said when he offered me the position, "you've got an old soul when it comes to engines. You understand both where we've been and where we're going." That's rare. I thought of my grandfather and wished he could have heard those words. Leading the project taught me more than just technical skills. I learned to manage people, to navigate corporate politics, and to present complex ideas to executives who cared more about profit margins than engineering elegance. The pressure was immense, but so was the satisfaction when our prototype exceeded performance expectations. The breakthrough came during a late-night testing session. We'd been struggling with heat management in the hybrid system. The transition between electric and combustion power created temperature spikes that affected overall efficiency. I was alone in the lab, reviewing thermal imaging data for the 100th time, when I remembered something my grandfather had shown me on the Mustang. "Engines breathe, Haley girl," he'd explained, pointing to the intake manifold. "And just like people, they perform best when they breathe rhythmically." That simple insight led to a radical redesign of the power transition timing. Instead of treating the electric and combustion components as separate systems that handed off to each other, we created a pulsed integration that allowed them to work in a synchronized rhythm. The result was a 34% increase in efficiency and a smoother performance than anything currently on the market. When we unveiled the technology at the Detroit Auto Show, industry publications called it revolutionary. 3 months later, I filed the patent application with Rivian's backing. 6 months after that, licensing inquiries started coming in from other manufacturers. The royalties from the patent transformed my financial situation overnight. My first check was enough to pay off my remaining student loans and put a down payment on a modest house with the large garage I'd always dreamed of. The second check allowed me to quit Rivian and establish Thompson Automotive Consulting. Starting my own firm was terrifying and exhilarating. I leased a small office space in a Detroit suburb, hired an administrative assistant named Zoe who quickly became indispensable, and began reaching out to contacts I'd made in the industry. My pitch was simple. I offered specialized consultation on efficiency optimization, particularly for companies developing hybrid or transitional technologies. My first client was a Japanese motorcycle manufacturer looking to develop a hybrid sport bike. The second was a German luxury car company interested in adapting my patented system for their performance line. By the end of my first year as an entrepreneur, I had 6 major clients and had hired 3 additional engineers to help manage the workload. Success brought unexpected attention. Automotive Engineering Monthly featured me in their 30 Under 30 issue. I was invited to speak at industry conferences and university engineering programs. A particularly surreal moment came when Stanford asked me to give a guest lecture to the same program I'd graduated from just a few years earlier. After one such speaking engagement, I was approached by a silver-haired man in an impeccable suit who introduced himself as Martin Weiss, CEO of Classic Revolution, a company known for creating modern electric versions of classic cars. "Ms. Thompson," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "your work on hybrid systems is impressive, but what caught my attention was your obvious passion for classic automobiles. The examples you used in your presentation, particularly that '67 Mustang, showed real knowledge." I smiled, thinking of the partially restored Mustang waiting in my garage. "I grew up with those cars, Mr. Weiss. My grandfather taught me everything I know about engines by restoring classics." "Then perhaps you'd be interested in a partnership. We're looking to develop a new line that honors the spirit of American muscle cars while incorporating cutting-edge hybrid technology. Your expertise in both worlds would be invaluable." The collaboration with Classic Revolution expanded my business beyond consultation into actual product development. We created a prototype system that could be retrofitted into classic car bodies, providing modern performance and efficiency while maintaining the distinctive feel and sound that collectors cherished. As my professional reputation grew, so did my personal collection of restoration projects. The garage attached to my house quickly proved inadequate, so I purchased an old body shop on the outskirts of Detroit, 5,000 square feet of space with lifts, specialized tools, and room for up to 8 vehicles. Weekends and evenings found me there, often working alone, restoring classics one by one. Each car taught me something new, but they were all preludes to the project that truly mattered, the Mustang. I approached its restoration differently than my other projects. This wasn't just about mechanical perfection or historical accuracy, it was about reclaiming a piece of my history. I hunted down original parts, often paying premium prices. I consulted with Mustang specialists when I encountered challenges. I even tracked down the same type of vintage leather my grandfather and I had planned to use for the seats. The engine was the greatest challenge. The original had been stripped for parts, leaving little more than the block. I considered installing one of my hybrid systems. It would have been poetically fitting, but ultimately decided to rebuild it to the original specifications. This car wasn't about showcasing my professional accomplishments. It was about honoring the legacy my grandfather had entrusted to me. The restoration took 18 months of dedicated work. I documented every step on social media, where my account had grown to over 200,000 followers. I didn't share the full story, just that the car had once belonged to my grandfather, had been sold, and that I'd spent years tracking it down. The comments were full of encouragement and questions about when I'd reveal the completed project. "Soon," I always replied. "There's one more journey this car needs to make first." That journey's destination became clear when I received a phone call from my father one Sunday evening, the first time he'd called directly in nearly 2 years. "Haley," he said, his voice sounding older and more tired than I remembered, "I know we don't talk much, but I thought you should know what's happening here." He explained that his company had finally gone through with the long-threatened downsizing, eliminating his middle management position after 26 years. At 58, he was struggling to find comparable work. Meanwhile, my mother's nothing serious health issues had developed into rheumatoid arthritis, requiring expensive medication that their insurance only partially covered. "We've had to sell the house," he said, the words clearly painful for him. "We're moving into a condo next month. Much smaller, but it's what we can afford now." I listened, feeling a complicated mix of sympathy and lingering resentment. "What about Megan?" I asked. "Is she helping?" My father's silence spoke volumes before he finally answered. "Megan's got her own situation. She's back living at home, actually. Her influencer career didn't. Well, she's between jobs right now." Translation: Megan was still being supported by my parents, even as they faced financial ruin. I'm sorry to hear about all this, I said carefully. It sounds like a difficult time. We'll manage, he replied with forced brightness. We always do. But it would be good to see you, Haley. It's been too long. After we hung up, I sat in my garage, staring at the now gleaming Mustang. The restoration was complete. The car was actually better than it had been when my parents sold it, better even than what my grandfather and I had originally planned. Every curve, every component, every stitch in the leather seats was perfect. I ran my hand along the hood, feeling the cool, smooth metal beneath my palm. What do you think, Grandpa? I asked aloud. Is it time to go home? The next day, I called my father back and told him I'd be visiting in 2 weeks. I didn't mention the Mustang. Some returns are better when they're a surprise. My parents' financial situation was worse than my father had admitted over the phone. As I dug deeper through careful questions during our occasional calls, the full picture emerged. Not only had Dad lost his job, but their savings had been severely depleted by a combination of my mother's medical expenses and Megan's constant financial needs. They had been forced to sell the family home, the 4-bedroom colonial where I'd grown up, and downsize to a 2-bedroom condo in a less desirable neighborhood. The process had been rushed, forcing them to sell furniture and belongings that wouldn't fit in the smaller space. Many of these items had been drastically undervalued in their haste to liquidate. Your mother's having a hard time adjusting, my father confided during one call. She keeps talking about the garden she had to leave behind. The garden had been my mother's pride and joy. Carefully cultivated roses, a small vegetable patch, and flowering trees she'd planted when each of us was born. Mine was a cherry tree that bloomed spectacularly each spring. Megan's was a dogwood with delicate white flowers. Both were now the property of strangers. Mom's health issues had progressed beyond the initial diagnosis. The rheumatoid arthritis affected her hands severely, making it difficult for her to perform everyday tasks. The medication that best controlled her symptoms cost $600 per month after insurance, an expense they could barely manage. But we're making it work, Dad insisted, his voice strained with forced optimism. The condo is cozy, and it's less maintenance. And your mother's trying some alternative therapies that might help reduce the medication costs. What he didn't say, what I had to piece together from comments and context, was that they were behind on payments for nearly everything: the mortgage on the new condo, medical bills, utilities. They were slowly drowning in debt, too proud to ask for help but too overwhelmed to find a solution. Meanwhile, Megan had returned home after her influencer career failed to materialize. She had dropped out of college 3 credits short of graduation to pursue social media fame, convinced that her cheerleading background and personal style would translate into sponsorships and opportunities. When that plan collapsed, she'd cycled through a series of retail jobs, never keeping any position for more than a few months. Now she was living in the 2nd bedroom of my parents' condo, supposedly saving money for her own place, but, from what I could gather, contributing little to the household expenses. Your sister's going through a tough time, my mother said defensively when I asked about Megan's situation. She's trying to find herself. At 25? I couldn't help responding. While you and Dad are selling your possessions to make ends meet? Everyone's journey is different, Haley, my mother replied with that familiar tone, the one that had always suggested Megan needed more understanding, more patience, more support than I did. My best friend from college, Alex Chin, now a financial advisor in Chicago, listened as I vented my frustration during one of our weekly video calls. They're still enabling her, I fumed, pacing across my living room with my phone. Even when they literally can't afford it. And she's letting them. Who does that? Alex's face on my screen remained thoughtful. Someone who's never had to face consequences, he said finally. Look, I know you're still angry about the car. This isn't about the car, I interrupted, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Maybe not entirely, Alex conceded. But it is about patterns that started a long time ago. Your parents always treated you and Megan differently. They expected more from you and gave more to her. That dynamic doesn't just disappear. So, what am I supposed to do? Just watch them go bankrupt supporting my almost 30-year-old sister. Alex was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do, Haley? Not what you think you should do, but what do you actually want? I stopped pacing and sank onto my couch. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to help them, they're my parents, and despite everything, I don't want them to suffer. But another part is still hurt, Alex finished for me. And maybe afraid that helping them financially means forgiving what they did. Is that petty? I asked. To still be hung up on something that happened when I was 17? It's not about the car itself, Alex said gently. It's about what it represented. They took something that was legally and emotionally yours and gave the benefits to your sister. That's a pretty fundamental breach of trust. I nodded, feeling the familiar ache whenever I thought about that day. Coming home to find the Mustang gone, sold without my knowledge or consent. But here's something to consider, Alex continued. Forgiveness doesn't have to be about them. It can be about freeing yourself from carrying this weight. And helping doesn't have to mean enabling the same patterns. That conversation stayed with me as I completed the final touches on the Mustang's restoration. The car was now perfect, better than new, with its original character intact, but with subtle modern improvements to the brakes and electrical system. The vintage blue paint gleamed under the garage lights, and the engine purred with a satisfying rumble that I knew would have made my grandfather proud. As I polished the chrome trim one final time, I made my decision. I would go home, not just for a brief visit, but to truly confront the past. And I would bring the Mustang with me. I called my father the next day. "Dad," I said when he answered, "I'm coming home for a week. I think we need to talk. Really talk about everything that's happening with you and Mom." His surprise was evident in his silence before he finally responded. "We'd like that, Haley. It's been too long." "I'll drive down next weekend," I said, looking at the Mustang. "There's something I want to show you." I spent the next few days preparing for the journey. I had the Mustang thoroughly checked by a trusted mechanic, packed a small suitcase, and organized my work schedule to allow for a full week away. I also contacted several realtors in my hometown, asking them to send information on available properties, smaller homes with good accessibility features that might suit my parents' needs. The morning of my departure, I stood in my garage looking at the Mustang, its tank full, ready for the 300-mile journey to my hometown. This car had already traveled so far from my grandfather's garage to mine, from neglected project to prized possession, from symbol of betrayal to emblem of my success. Now it would carry me back to face the family who had taken it from me, who had failed to see its value, both monetary and emotional, until it was too late. I ran my hand along the fender, feeling the smooth, cool metal beneath my palm. "Let's go show them what they missed, old girl," I whispered, then climbed behind the wheel and fired up the engine. As I pulled out of my driveway, the rumble of the V8 vibrating through the steering wheel, I couldn't help smiling at the thought of my parents' faces when I pulled up in the car they had sold for a fraction of its worth, the car that now, like me, had been transformed into something more valuable than they could have imagined. The journey back to my hometown took 8 hours, longer than necessary, because I avoided the interstate when possible, preferring the scenic routes where the Mustang could truly shine. Every small town I passed through, people turned to look at the car, some offering thumbs up or appreciative nods. At gas stations, I fielded the inevitable questions. What year? How long did the restoration take? Is that the original engine? I answered politely but briefly, not sharing the deeper story. That revelation was reserved for the people waiting at the end of my journey. As familiar landmarks began to appear, I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and anxiety. The diner where my family used to have Sunday breakfast. The high school where I'd been the odd girl who preferred shop class to cheerleading. The park where my grandfather had sometimes taken me to feed ducks when I was very young. I followed my GPS to my parents' new address. A beige condo building in a development that hadn't existed when I lived here. It looked bland and impersonal, a stark contrast to our old family home with its wraparound porch and maple trees in the front yard. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the Mustang into a visitor's parking space and cut the engine. For a moment, I sat in silence, my hands still resting on the steering wheel, gathering my courage. "We're here, Grandpa," I whispered. Then I grabbed my weekend bag from the passenger seat and headed for Building 3, Unit 204. My father opened the door before I could knock. He must have been watching from the window. He looked older than I remembered, his hair now completely gray, new lines etched around his eyes and mouth, his shoulders slightly stooped. But his eyes lit up when he saw me, and for a second, I glimpsed the dad who had once pushed me on swings and taught me to ride a bike. "Haley," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're really here." Before I could respond, he pulled me into an awkward hug. I allowed it, even returning it briefly before stepping back. "It's good to see you, Dad," I said, surprised to find I meant it. He ushered me inside. The condo was indeed small, a combined living and dining area, a galley kitchen visible through a pass-through, and a hallway that presumably led to the bedrooms. The furniture was a mix of pieces I recognized from our old house, looking oversized in the smaller space, and newer, cheaper items probably purchased to fill gaps. My mother rose from an armchair as I entered. Like my father, she had aged visibly, her hair thinner, her face more drawn. But the most noticeable change was in her hands, which were slightly swollen and bent at the joints. She wore a simple gold wedding band, but her fingers had become too misshapen for the diamond engagement ring I remembered. "Haley," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "My beautiful girl." I hugged her more genuinely than I had my father, careful not to squeeze too tightly. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling?" "Oh, good days and bad days," she said with forced brightness. "Today is definitely a good day now that you're here." We engaged in careful small talk as I settled in, discussions about my drive down, the weather, my mother's new medication regimen. They asked polite questions about my work, though I could tell they didn't fully understand what I did. Neither mentioned the Mustang, and I didn't volunteer that information. "Not yet. Is Megan here?" I asked finally, noticing the conspicuous absence of my sister. My parents exchanged a glance loaded with meaning I couldn't quite interpret. "She's out with friends," my father said. "She should be back for dinner. We're ordering from Antonio's, your favorite pizza place. It's still there, though Antonio Jr. runs it now." I nodded, remembering the thin-crust pepperoni pizzas that had been a special treat in my childhood. "Sounds good." My mother gave me a tour of their new home, a process that took all of 5 minutes given its size. The master bedroom barely fit their queen-sized bed and a single dresser. The second bedroom, where Megan was staying, was a chaos of clothing, makeup, and social media equipment, a ring light, a tripod, various backdrops. The bathroom was small, but had been modified with grab bars for my mother's safety. "It's cozy," my mother said with that same forced cheerfulness. "And the association takes care of all the outdoor maintenance, which is a blessing with my hands the way they are." I nodded, noting the lack of personal touches that had made our old house a home, the family photos that had lined the staircase, my mother's collection of blown glass figurines, the comfortable clutter of a life well lived. This place felt temporary, like an extended stay hotel rather than a home. As afternoon turned to evening, I helped my father set the table while my mother rested. This gave us a rare moment alone together. "Dad," I said quietly, arranging napkins at each place setting, "why didn't you call me sooner about all this? About Mom's health, about losing your job?" He kept his eyes on the plates he was setting out. "You made it pretty clear you wanted distance from us, Haley. And after what happened with the car." He trailed off, then sighed. "We didn't feel we had the right to ask for your help." I was formulating a response when the front door burst open and Megan blew in like a hurricane. At 25, my sister was still conventionally beautiful, though her looks now had a harder edge, too much makeup, hair bleached a shade of blonde that didn't occur in nature, clothing that seemed calculated for maximum social media impact. She stopped short when she saw me, her expression cycling rapidly through surprise, wariness, and finally a brittle smile. "Well, look who finally remembered she has a family," she said, dropping her oversized purse on the couch. "The prodigal genius returns." "Megan," my father said with a warning tone. "We talked about this." My sister rolled her eyes, but approached to give me a quick, perfunctory hug that smelled of expensive perfume. "Sorry." "Hi, Haley. You look corporate." I glanced down at my simple jeans and sweater. "Thanks, I think. You look exactly the same." An uncomfortable silence fell, broken by the arrival of the pizza delivery. We gathered around the small dining table, the conversation stilted and superficial. My parents asked safe questions about my work, my house in Michigan, whether I was seeing anyone I wasn't. Megan talked at length about her latest business idea, a lifestyle coaching service for young women, which sounded suspiciously like another attempt to monetize her non-existent influencer status. As we finished eating, I decided it was time. "I brought something to show you," I said, reaching for my phone. "Something I've been working on for the past couple of years." I pulled up the photo gallery dedicated to the Mustang's restoration and handed the phone to my father. "Swipe through these." His brow furrowed in confusion as he looked at the first image, the Mustang as I'd found it in the junkyard, damaged and rusted. Then his expression changed to disbelief as he swiped through the progression of photos showing the car's transformation back to glory. "Is this?" he began, his voice trailing off. "Grandpa's Mustang," I confirmed. "The one you sold when I was 17. I tracked it down about 2 years ago." My mother leaned over to look at the photos, her hand rising to cover her mouth. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "You found it." "What was left of it," I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the emotion welling in my chest. "It had been through several owners. The last one crashed it into a tree and abandoned it at a junkyard in Illinois. I bought it back and restored it again." My father looked up from the phone, his eyes suspiciously bright. "These photos are incredible. The car looks better than new." "It is better than new," I said. "And it's outside if you want to see it in person." The shock on their faces might have been comical under different circumstances. "You drove it here?" my father asked incredulously. "It's here right now?" I nodded, standing up from the table. "Come see." All three of them followed me outside to the visitor parking area where the Mustang sat gleaming under the early evening light, its vintage blue paint catching the golden hues of sunset. My father approached it slowly, almost reverently, circling the car with the careful eye of someone who appreciates fine craftsmanship. "Haley," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, "this is extraordinary. The work you've done." He trailed off, shaking his head in amazement. My mother was more direct. "I'm so sorry," she said simply, tears tracking down her cheeks. "We should never have sold it. We didn't understand what it meant to you." Megan hung back, her expression unreadable. I wasn't sure what I had expected from her, perhaps more of the dismissive attitude she'd shown inside, but her silence was somehow more unsettling. "Would you like to see the engine?" I asked my father, popping the hood. He peered inside, visibly impressed by the immaculate restoration. "You rebuilt this yourself?" "From scratch." "Most of it," I confirmed. Some parts one had to source from specialists, but the assembly was all me. "Your grandfather would be so proud," he said quietly. Then, to my surprise, he began to cry, not just tears, but actual sobs that shook his shoulders. I stood awkwardly, unsure how to respond to this display of emotion from my stoic father. After a moment, I reached out and placed my hand on his arm. "Dad," I said gently, "would you like to take it for a drive?" He looked up, wiping his eyes with embarrassment. "Really? You'd let me drive it?" "Keys are in the ignition," I said, stepping back. "Just you and me, like when you taught me to drive in the high school parking lot." My father slid into the driver's seat with reverence, his hands caressing the steering wheel. I walked around to the passenger side and got in beside him. As he turned the key, the engine roared to life, its deep rumble seeming to vibrate through our bodies. "Remember to give it a little extra gas when you shift into second," I advised as he pulled carefully out of the parking space. "The clutch grabs high." We drove in silence for several minutes, my father growing more comfortable with the car's power and handling. Finally, on a straight stretch of road outside town, he spoke. "I've regretted selling this car every day since we did it," he said, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Not just because of how it hurt you, though that's been hard enough to live with, but because I let myself be pressured into making a decision I knew was wrong." "Pressured by who?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "By your mother, partly. She never understood why the car mattered so much to you." "By financial stress, certainly." He paused. "And by Megan. She was very insistent about needing money for her activities, her car, her social standing. And now? I prompted when he fell silent. Now we're paying the price for a lifetime of those decisions, he said heavily. For always giving Megan what she wanted instead of what she needed. For not appreciating your independence and drive. For selling a car that would now be worth, he broke off, shaking his head. About $120,000 in this condition, I supplied. Maybe more to the right buyer. He whistled low. We sold it for $15,000 and thought we were being clever. It wasn't about the money, I said. It was never about the money, Dad. It was about respect. About honoring what Grandpa wanted for me. About asking before taking something that wasn't yours to take. I know that now, he said quietly. Too late, but I know it. When we returned to the condo, my mother was waiting anxiously in the parking lot. Megan had disappeared back inside. How was it? Mom asked as Dad reluctantly turned off the engine. Like driving a piece of history, he replied, patting the dashboard affectionately before getting out. Haley's done something remarkable here. We returned inside to find Megan on the couch, scrolling through her phone with affected disinterest. As we settled in the living room, the conversation inevitably turned to my parents' financial situation. We're managing, my father insisted, though his expression belied his words. Dad, I said gently, I know about the medical bills, the mortgage payments, everything. You don't have to pretend things are fine. My mother looked startled. How did you? I'm good at research, I said simply. And Dad's told me more than he probably realizes during our calls. I turned to Megan, who was still pretending to focus on her phone. What I don't understand is why you're not helping them. You're living here rent-free while they're drowning in debt. Megan's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. Not all of us have fancy engineering degrees and patent royalties, she snapped. Some of us are still trying to figure things out. You're 25, Megan. Mom and Dad are in their late 50s with serious health and financial problems. When exactly are you planning to start contributing? Haley, my mother interjected, your sister is going through a difficult time. No, Mom, I interrupted firmly. This is exactly the problem. You're still making excuses for her while you can barely afford your medication. It needs to stop. To my surprise, my father nodded. She's right, Linda. We can't keep doing this. Megan stood up abruptly. I can't believe this. You come back after 5 years of barely speaking to any of us, and suddenly you're the authority on our family dynamics? You don't get to judge my life. I'm not judging your life, I replied calmly. I'm pointing out that your choices are hurting Mom and Dad. That's just reality. Well, reality is that not everyone gets handed a classic car by Grandpa or has some special genius talent that makes them rich before 30. Megan shouted. Some of us are normal people who struggle. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that escalating would solve nothing. Megan, this isn't about comparing our lives. It's about the fact that Mom and Dad need help, and you're in a position to provide some of that help but aren't doing so. What do you want me to do? I barely make enough from my part-time job to cover my own expenses. You could start by paying rent, I suggested. Or contributing to groceries. Or helping Mom with her medication costs instead of buying designer clothes and salon treatments. Megan's face flushed with anger. You have no idea what my life is like. You've always been the perfect daughter, and I've always been the screw-up. Well, I'm sick of living in your shadow. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. Megan, wait, my father called, but she was already gone, the door slamming behind her. An uncomfortable silence descended on the room. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice small. She'll calm down. She always does. I sighed, moving to sit beside my mother on the couch. Mom, Dad, we need to talk about your situation honestly. No more pretending things are fine when they're not. Over the next 2 hours, we had the most candid conversation of our adult lives. They laid out their financial reality in stark terms. The medical bills that kept mounting, the mortgage they could barely afford, my father's unsuccessful job search, and yes, the ongoing drain of supporting Megan's lifestyle. I want to help, I said finally. Not as a handout, but as an investment in our family's future. We can't take your money, Haley, my father protested. After everything. You're not taking it, I corrected. I'm offering it, with conditions. First, Megan starts contributing or finds somewhere else to live. Second, we look for a more suitable place for you both, something single level that's easier for mom to navigate and more affordable to maintain. Third, we get mom in to see a specialist I know in Detroit who's doing groundbreaking work with rheumatoid arthritis treatments. My parents exchanged a long look, having one of those silent conversations that only couples who have been together for decades can have. We need to think about it, my father said finally. This is a lot to process. Of course, I agreed. I'm here for a week. We have time. Later that night, after my mother had gone to bed and Megan still hadn't returned, my father asked me to join him on the small balcony off the living room. We stood side by side, looking out at the parking lot where the Mustang gleamed under the security lights. Your grandfather left that car to you because he saw something in you, my father said quietly. A determination, a meticulous attention to detail, a passion for bringing broken things back to life. I didn't see it then, or I did, but I didn't value it the way he did. He turned to face me, his expression open and vulnerable in a way I'd rarely seen. I'm sorry, Haley. Not just for selling the car, but for not appreciating who you were. For always expecting you to be the strong one, the independent one, while we focused on Megan's needs. It wasn't fair. No, I agreed, it wasn't. But you've become an extraordinary woman despite our mistakes. Maybe even because of them. He smiled sadly. I'd like to think your grandfather would be proud of how you've handled everything, not just restoring the car, but building your life on your own terms. I felt something shift inside me, not a complete healing of old wounds, but the beginning of a new understanding. I think he'd be proud of me for coming back, I said. For not letting resentment keep me away forever. My father nodded, blinking back tears. I'd like to show you something, he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, worn photograph and handed it to me. In the dim light, I could make out the image of my grandfather standing beside a much younger version of my father. Between them was a car, not the Mustang, but an older model I didn't recognize. That was your grandfather's first restoration project, my father explained. A 1955 Chevy Bel Air. He sold it to pay for my college tuition when his business hit a rough patch. I was furious with him at the time. I'd helped with that car, loved that car. I looked up in surprise. You never told me that. Because I was ashamed, he admitted. Ashamed that I didn't understand what he was trying to teach me until it was too late. And then I turned around and did the same thing to you with the Mustang. He shook his head. History repeats itself when we don't learn from it. Maybe, I said, handing back the photograph, or maybe some lessons just take a few generations to sink in. We stood in companionable silence for a while longer before returning inside. As I settled onto the pull-out couch that would be my bed for the week, I realized that the Mustang had once again become more than just a car. It was now a vehicle for a different kind of restoration. Not of metal and chrome, but of trust and understanding between a father and daughter who had both lost their way. 6 months after my return to my hometown, I stood in the driveway of a modest ranch-style home, watching my parents explore their new space with cautious excitement. The single-level layout with wide doorways would accommodate my mother's mobility needs as her condition progressed. The manageable yard featured raised garden beds at a height she could tend without bending. The location, just 15 minutes from their old neighborhood, kept them connected to familiar surroundings while providing a fresh start. I hadn't simply bought them a house. That would have perpetuated the dependency patterns our family needed to break. Instead, I'd worked with a financial advisor to structure an arrangement that protected everyone. My parents sold their condo, contributed the proceeds as a down payment, and I covered the remainder. They paid a modest rent that went toward building equity in the property, which would eventually transfer to them. It wasn't charity. It was a sound investment in their stability and our relationship. The changes in our family dynamic hadn't happened overnight. After my initial visit, I'd returned to Michigan to establish a satellite office of Thompson Automotive Consulting in my hometown. The expansion made business sense. The area had a growing tech sector with several companies interested in our services, but the personal benefits were equally significant. My father now worked part-time managing the administrative aspects of the local office. At 59, He wasn't ready for retirement, and his decades of business experience proved valuable in handling client relations and office operations. The position restored his sense of purpose and dignity while providing income that helped with their expenses. "Haley," he called from the kitchen, "come see this view of the backyard. Your mother's already planning where to plant her roses." I joined my parents at the large kitchen window that overlooked a small but sunny yard. My mother stood with her arm linked through my father's, her face more relaxed than I'd seen it in years. "I thought maybe a cherry tree on the left side," she said, pointing. "To replace the one from our old house." The mention of the tree she'd planted when I was born, a gesture I hadn't known she remembered so specifically, caught me by surprise. "I'd like that," I said simply. My mother's health had stabilized thanks to the specialist I'd connected her with in Detroit. The new treatment protocol hadn't cured her rheumatoid arthritis, but it had significantly reduced her pain and slowed the progression of joint damage. More importantly, she'd started therapy to address the anxiety that had fueled much of her enabling behavior toward Megan. Speaking of my sister, her story had taken an unexpected turn. After storming out during my visit, she'd stayed with friends for several days before returning to have what my father described as the most honest conversation we've ever had with her. The truth that emerged was more complex than simple entitlement. Megan had spent years feeling inadequate compared to my academic achievements and close relationship with our grandfather. Rather than developing her own strengths, she leaned into being the needy child, unconsciously recognizing that our parents responded to dependency. Their attention and financial support had become her way of feeling valued. The family intervention that followed wasn't easy. There were tears, accusations, and painful acknowledgments on all sides. But ultimately, Megan agreed to professional counseling and to find her own apartment within 2 months. To everyone's surprise, perhaps most of all her own, Megan discovered an aptitude for event planning through a temporary job coordinating a charity fundraiser. She'd since built a small but growing business organizing local corporate events, utilizing her social skills in a productive way. She was still finding her footing financially, but for the first time, she was genuinely independent. Our relationship remained complicated. Years of rivalry and resentment couldn't be erased in months, but we'd established a tentative truce based on mutual respect for each other's separate paths. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted my thoughts. Through the window, I watched Megan emerge from her used Honda Civic, a practical vehicle she'd purchased herself to replace the gas-guzzling Jeep our parents had helped fund years ago. "Perfect timing," my mother said. "She's bringing lunch from that new deli downtown." As my sister entered carrying bags of food, I noticed the changes in her appearance: simpler clothing, less dramatic makeup, a more natural hair color. But the most significant change was in her demeanor. A newfound confidence that came from earning her own way rather than performing for attention. "Kitchen's nice," she commented, setting down the bags. "Better than that closet they called a kitchen in the condo." After lunch, while my parents unpacked boxes in their bedroom, I found myself alone with Megan in the living room, arranging books on the built-in shelves. "Thanks," she said abruptly, not looking at me as she aligned a row of my mother's favorite novels. "For lunch?" "It was your treat," I replied, deliberately misunderstanding. Megan rolled her eyes, a familiar gesture that was somehow comforting in its familiarity. "For not giving up on them. On us. You could have just sent money from Michigan and washed your hands of the whole mess." I considered this as I unpacked another box of books. That wouldn't have fixed anything. And I didn't come back just for them. She looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. "I know," she said quietly. "You came back for yourself too. To finish things properly." The insight surprised me. Maybe therapy was helping her develop perception along with self-awareness. "Do you remember," she continued, "that time when we were kids and Grandpa took us fishing at Lake Mercer? You caught that huge bass, and I was so jealous I pushed you into the water." I laughed at the memory. "And then you felt so guilty you jumped in after me, even though you couldn't swim very well." "Grandpa had to rescue both of us," Megan said, smiling. "He wasn't even mad. He just said, 'Thompson girls don't do anything halfway, do they?' The shared memory created a moment of genuine connection between us. Not enough to erase the past, but enough to suggest that perhaps our future relationship could be built on something more substantial than competition and resentment. That evening, after Megan had left and my parents had retired to their new bedroom, exhausted from moving day, I sat on the front porch with a cup of tea. The Mustang was parked in the driveway, its silhouette distinctive in the gathering dusk. On impulse, I took my tea and the keys and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cool against my back, the steering wheel smooth beneath my palms. I didn't start the engine, I just sat there, thinking about the journey this car had taken me on, literally and figuratively. When my grandfather left me the Mustang, he wasn't just giving me a vehicle, he was giving me a lesson in value. Not just the monetary value of a classic car, but the value of persistence, of craftsmanship, of seeing potential where others saw only rust and dents. He was teaching me that sometimes the things most worth having are the ones you have to rebuild yourself. My parents had failed to understand that lesson when they sold the car. But in a strange way, their mistake had set me on a path that proved the lesson more powerfully than if they'd respected my inheritance. I had built myself along with rebuilding the car, becoming someone stronger, more capable, and ultimately more forgiving than I might otherwise have been. The following weekend, I organized a family outing, a drive in the Mustang to my grandfather's favorite spot, a scenic overlook about an hour from town. My father sat in the passenger seat, my mother and Megan in the back. As we cruised along country roads, the autumn leaves creating a kaleidoscope of color around us, I found myself thinking about the difference between revenge and redemption. I had initially tracked down the Mustang with something like revenge in mind, a desire to show my family what they had thrown away, both in terms of the car and in terms of their relationship with me. But somewhere along the way, the project had transformed into something else. A journey toward healing rather than retribution. As we reached the overlook and parked, all four of us sat in silence for a moment, taking in the spectacular view of rolling hills and the river valley below. Then, without discussion, we got out and walked to the guardrail. "Your grandfather proposed to your grandmother here," my father said suddenly. "Did he ever tell you that?" I shook my head, surprised. "No, he never mentioned it. It was right after he came back from Korea," my father continued. "He said he wanted to show her that no matter how bad things got, and they'd been pretty bad in the war, there was always something beautiful waiting if you just kept going." My mother slipped her hand into my father's, her swollen fingers entwined with his. Megan stood slightly apart, taking photos of the view with her phone, not for social media, I realized, but simply to remember the moment. I thought about my grandfather's words, about beauty waiting for those who persevered. The Mustang hadn't just been waiting for me, I'd had to search for it, fight for it, rebuild it piece by piece. The same was true of my relationship with my family. The betrayal had happened, the hurt was real, but healing was possible with effort and time. That evening, back at my parents' new home, I sat with my father on the back patio. The cherry tree my mother wanted wouldn't be planted until spring, but we could already envision how it would look, how it would grow over the years. "You know," my father said, "when your grandfather left you that car, I was a little hurt. I thought maybe he'd leave it to me, and then I could pass it on to you someday." "Why do you think he didn't?" I asked, curious about this perspective I'd never considered. My father thought for a moment. "Because he knew you'd appreciate it in a way I never could. And because he understood something about you that took me much longer to see." "What's that?" "That you needed to know someone believed in you completely, without reservation. That you needed a legacy that was yours alone, not something filtered through your parents' expectations." He smiled sadly. He was right, of course. I just wish I'd understood it before we made such a terrible mistake. "We can't change the past," I said, echoing words my grandfather had often used. "We can only rebuild what's broken and drive on." My father laughed. "Is that a car metaphor I hear from the automotive engineer?" "Occupational hazard," I admitted with a smile. In the months that followed, our family continued the delicate work of rebuilding. We established new boundaries, new ways of communicating, new respect for each other's separate journeys. It wasn't always smooth, old patterns sometimes reasserted themselves, and progress wasn't linear. But like the restoration of a classic car, the process itself became valuable. Each small repair, each replaced part, each careful adjustment brought us closer to something that worked better than before. Not perfect, not brand new, but authentic and roadworthy. I established the Robert Thompson Memorial Scholarship for Young Mechanics at the local community college, using some of my patent royalties to fund an annual award that covered tuition and tools for a promising student. The first recipient was a 17-year-old girl who reminded me of myself, determined, meticulous, and passionate about bringing old engines back to life. Sometimes the car isn't just a car, and the journey back isn't just about the miles. It's about rebuilding engines and relationships, one part at a time. My grandfather understood that when he left me the Mustang. It just took the rest of us a little longer to learn the lesson. Have you ever had something precious taken from you that you later reclaimed? Or have you experienced a family conflict that eventually led to healing? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you navigated your own journey of rebuilding what was broken. Don't forget to like this video if you found something valuable in my story, subscribe for more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes losing what you love can eventually lead you to become someone stronger. Thank you for being part of this journey with me, and remember, the road ahead is always worth the drive.